A white officer blocked a black captain from a use of force hearing, not knowing the empty chair at the head of the table had his name on it. The hallway outside conference room 4B was quiet in that cold government building way, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of old coffee drifting from a break room somewhere around the corner. On the door, a printed sign had been taped at eye level. Use of force review hearing, 9 a.m. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Department Command Staff and Civilian Oversight only. Captain Marcus Ellison arrived at 8:56, not early enough to look nervous, not late enough to look careless. He wore a navy suit, polished black shoes, and a silver captain's badge clipped neatly beside his identification card. In his left hand, he carried a gray folder thick with reports, body camera summaries, witness statements, and the kind of details that could change a man's career if read honestly. Marcus had spent 18 years learning that truth rarely walked into a room loudly. Sometimes it came in calm, carrying paperwork. He reached for the door handle, but before his fingers touched the metal, Officer Daniel Whitaker stepped in front of him. Whitaker was broad-shouldered, clean-cut, and wearing the expression of a man who believed a uniform made every hallway his property. He gave Marcus one quick look, the kind that did not study rank, did not study credentials, did not study purpose. It only studied skin. Then he smiled, thin and polite enough to deny later. "This is a command-level meeting, officer," Whitaker said. "You can wait with the others." Marcus paused, not because he was shocked. That would have been too generous. He had seen this before in hotel lobbies, court buildings, training conferences, and even inside police headquarters where his name was already printed on the agenda. He had learned long ago that some people did not need a reason to question whether he belonged. They only needed a doorway. "I'm aware of what meeting this is," Marcus said, his voice low and even. Whitaker's eyes dropped to the folder, then to the badge, then back to Marcus's face, as if each piece of evidence bothered him more than the last. "Then you know it's restricted." Behind the half-open blinds of the conference room window, Marcus could see movement, dark uniforms shifting around a long table, coffee cups being set down, chairs scraping softly against the floor. At the far end sat one empty chair. The chair, a white nameplate lay flat in front of it, turned face down, waiting. Marcus looked past Whitaker for half a second, just long enough to see the room where accountability was supposed to begin. Then he looked back at the officer blocking him. "Are you denying me entry?" Whitaker gave a quiet laugh, barely more than breath. "I'm maintaining order." There it was. Not a shout, not a scene. Something smaller, cleaner, easier to hide. The kind of disrespect that wears procedure like a mask. Marcus glanced up at the black dome camera in the ceiling, then down at the time on his watch. 8:58, 2 minutes before the hearing. 2 minutes before the room would learn exactly who had been kept outside. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He simply adjusted the folder in his hand and said, "Then let the record show that." Marcus did not move from the hallway, and somehow that made Officer Whitaker more uncomfortable than if he had argued. There was a strange power in stillness, the kind that forced other people to hear their own words after they had spoken them. Whitaker shifted his weight and looked toward the conference room, where voices were beginning to gather into the low murmur of officials preparing to decide whether a line had been crossed 3 nights earlier on the east side of Brookhaven. The case was supposed to be simple on paper. A traffic stop at 10:42 p.m. A blue sedan with a broken taillight. A 22-year-old community college student named Jordan Price driving home from his second shift at a grocery warehouse 10 miles outside town. A nervous call for backup. A misunderstanding that became a complaint. A complaint that became a citywide question. But nothing about the file in Marcus Ellison's hand felt simple. Inside that gray folder were still photographs taken from body camera footage, a dispatch log, 2 written reports, a statement from Jordan's mother, and a medical note that used careful language to describe harm without ever describing fear. Marcus knew that language well. Institutions loved careful words. They could make panic sound like procedure. They could make pain sound like an incident. They could make accountability sound optional if no one at the table cared enough to read every line. That was why this hearing mattered. It was not a trial. It was not a television courtroom. It was something quieter, and sometimes quieter things were more dangerous to people who depended on noise. This was where timelines were compared, where training policy met real behavior. where a sentence in a report could be placed beside a timestamp and either stand on truth or collapse under it. Marcus had been asked to chair the review because he had spent years teaching de-escalation, not as a slogan printed on a wall, but as a discipline measured in seconds, tone, distance, patience, and the choice not to treat fear as defiance. He had trained officers from Savannah to Atlanta, standing in gyms, city halls, and police academies, telling them the same thing every time. The first duty of authority is control of self, not control of the room, not control of the citizen. Self. Yet here, 4 feet from the door, a man under review had decided that control meant deciding who was allowed to enter. Whitaker glanced again at Marcus's badge, and this time his eyes caught the rank. For a flicker of a second, something uncertain crossed his face, but pride stepped in quickly and covered it. "Look," Whitaker said, lowering his voice as if offering kindness instead of insult. "Things are tense enough today. We do not need extra people stirring this up." Marcus heard the phrase clearly. Extra people. Stirring this up. The old language in new clothes. He looked through the narrow window again. Inside, at the far end of the table, the empty chair waited beneath the cold white lights. The hearing had not started yet, but the first piece of evidence had already presented itself in the hallway. Marcus Ellison had not built his career by forcing doors open. He had built it by becoming the person people had to answer to when the door finally opened on its own. 18 years earlier, he had walked into the Brookhaven Police Department as a young patrol officer with a pressed uniform, a borrowed tie, and his grandfather's voice still living somewhere behind his ribs. Never let another man's confusion become your identity. Back then, Marcus was 24, 6 feet tall, quiet, and careful with every word because he understood something many of his classmates never had to learn. One mistake could become his whole name in someone else's mouth. So he arrived early. He stayed late. He wrote clean reports. He learned policy until he could quote it under pressure. He treated every driver, every witness, every grieving mother, and every angry teenager like a person before he treated them like a problem. That did not make the job easy. It made it honest. Over the years, he had seen good officers carry the weight of hard decisions, and he had seen bad ones hide behind the same badge. The difference, Marcus believed, was never the uniform. It was humility. A good officer knew the badge was borrowed trust. A dangerous one thought it was personal power. That belief had cost him friends. It had made him unpopular in rooms where silence was treated as loyalty. When Marcus began teaching de-escalation, some officers rolled their eyes before he even started. They expected a lecture. What he gave them was a mirror. He would stand in front of a training class and say, "The street does not need your ego. The street needs your judgment." Some listened. Some changed. Some waited until the session ended and joked in the parking lot. Marcus remembered their faces, not with bitterness, but with clarity. People always revealed themselves when they thought accountability had left the room. That morning, standing outside Conference Room 4B, he saw the same pattern in Officer Daniel Whitaker's eyes. Whitaker was not confused anymore. He had seen the rank. He had seen the badge. But admitting that Marcus belonged in that room would mean admitting the first judgment had not come from policy at all. It had come from something older, uglier, and far more familiar. Marcus thought of Jordan Price, the young man whose name sat on the first page of the folder. He thought of Jordan's mother, Denise, who had written in her statement that her son had stopped speaking at dinner, not because of what happened on the roadside, but because of how quickly adults in authority had made him feel invisible afterward. That sentence had stayed with Marcus. Invisible afterward. Maybe that was the part people missed. Harm did not always end when an incident ended. Sometimes it followed a person home, sat beside them at the table, and taught them to lower their eyes. Marcus looked at the closed door, then at Whitaker, and felt no desire to embarrass him. That would be too small. What Marcus wanted was the truth, complete and undeniable, placed in the center of the room where no one could step around it. Officer Whitaker looked at the clock on the wall behind Marcus, then at the folder in Marcus's hand, and his patience began to thin. It was not anger exactly. It was the discomfort of a man realizing that the person he had dismissed was not behaving like someone beneath him. Marcus was too calm, too precise, too unwilling to shrink. That kind of dignity irritated people who expected fear to do half their work for them. "I said you can wait," Whitaker repeated, his voice still low but sharper now. "There is a process here." Marcus nodded once. "Then follow it." The words were simple, but they landed hard enough to change the air between them. A clerk passing down the hallway slowed for half a second, sensed the tension, and continued walking with her eyes fixed on the carpet. Two officers near the vending machine stopped talking. One of them, a young officer named Ryan Cole, looked toward Marcus, then quickly looked away when Whitaker glanced in his direction. Marcus noticed. He always noticed the small decisions. The face that turned, the mouth that stayed closed, the hands that suddenly became busy with a paper cup. Silence was rarely empty. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes it was agreement. Sometimes it was a person deciding that someone else's dignity was not worth the risk. Whitaker stepped closer to the door until his shoulder nearly touched the frame. "Show me your identification again." Marcus held it up without handing it over. The badge, the department card, the rank, the name, all visible under the fluorescent light. Captain Marcus Ellison, Professional Standards Division. Whitaker stared at it longer this time. Long enough to read. Long enough to know. "Still," he said, "this does not tell me who cleared you for this hearing." Marcus's eyes did not move. "The City Review Board did." "I have not been informed of that." "That is not the same thing." A faint sound came from inside the room, the soft scrape of a chair, and then a brief laugh, as if someone had made a joke while the real story waited outside the door. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "You know what I think," he said. "I think people are looking for a reason to turn this department into the villain. I think everyone wants a headline. I think this whole thing stopped being about facts the second outside pressure got involved." Marcus let the sentence breathe. He had learned that some words deserved space, not because they were wise, but because the room needed to hear how heavy they were. "Jordan Price is not outside pressure," Marcus said. "He is a citizen." Whitaker's expression hardened. "He is part of an active review. So are you." For the first time, Whitaker had no immediate answer. The hallway seemed to narrow around them. The air conditioner clicked on above the ceiling panels, pushing cold air over the polished floor. Marcus lowered his identification, opened his folder, and removed a single printed page. Not to threaten, not to perform, just enough for Whitaker to see the top line of the agenda. Use of Force Review Hearing. Chair, Captain Marcus Ellison. Whitaker saw it. His eyes moved across the page, and something like panic tried to surface before pride dragged it back under. He forced a smile. Anyone can print an agenda. Marcus put the page back into the folder. And anyone can be recorded by a hallway camera ignoring one. Whitaker looked up toward the black dome in the ceiling, then back at Marcus. There was no shouting now. No audience large enough to hide behind. Just a door, a camera, a clock, and the truth arriving 1 minute at a time. Whitaker did not open the door for Marcus. He opened it for himself. That was the difference. And Marcus understood it the moment Whitaker turned the handle and stepped halfway into the conference room, as if he were returning from some minor inconvenience he had already handled. The room beyond him was long and narrow, lit too brightly by square ceiling panels that made every face look tired before the day had even started. A city seal hung on the far wall. A row of framed department values stood beside it. Words like integrity, service, restraint, and trust printed in clean black letters that felt almost uncomfortable under the circumstances. Around the table sat people who had come prepared to discuss policy, evidence, and public confidence. But most of them looked up when Whitaker entered with the expression of people sensing that something had already gone wrong. Sergeant Alicia Monroe sat near the middle of the table with a legal pad in front of her and a pen resting between her fingers. She was a 12-year veteran, steady, respected, and careful in the way women in uniform often had to be careful when a room was waiting to call confidence attitude. She looked past Whitaker toward the hallway and saw Marcus standing outside. Her pen stopped moving. Officer Ryan Cole sat 3 chairs away, both hands wrapped around a paper cup he had not drunk from. When his eyes met Marcus's, guilt crossed his face quickly, like a shadow passing over water. Then he looked down. Whitaker cleared his throat and moved to his seat. "We had someone trying to come in without proper clearance," he said, placing a folder on the table with unnecessary force. "I took care of it." The words were casual. Too casual. They landed in the room and stayed there. Alicia Monroe looked at him. "Who?" Whitaker pulled out his chair. "Some captain from Professional Standards." The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No one stood. But shoulders shifted. Eyes moved. Someone near the end of the table turned toward the empty chair at the head. The white nameplate still lay face down in front of it, untouched. Ryan Cole looked at the nameplate, then at the door, and his fingers tightened around the coffee cup until the lid bent. Slightly, Whitaker noticed the silence and mistook it for agreement. That was one of his habits. He believed quiet meant he had won. So he kept talking. "This is exactly what I am talking about," he said. "Everybody wants to turn a split-second decision into a political event. People who are not there. People who do not know the street. People who read a report from behind a desk and think they understand what it is like." Alicia set her pen down. "A review is not politics." Whitaker gave her a thin smile. "It becomes politics when certain people get involved." He did not say what he meant. He did not have to. The room heard it anyway. Through the glass beside the door, Marcus saw Alicia's face harden, not with surprise, but with recognition. She had heard versions of that sentence for years, polished differently, depending on who was in the room. Marcus remained in the hallway, holding the folder at his side. He could have stepped in. He could have ended the performance right there. But sometimes truth needed a few more seconds to gather witnesses. Inside, Whitaker leaned back and continued shaping the story before the hearing had even begun, speaking of pressure, optics, community anger, and unfair scrutiny. Not once did he say Jordan Price's name. Not once did he mention the missing 37 seconds between the first command and the moment listed in his report. Not once did he look at the empty chair and wonder why no one had filled it. Marcus looked down at his phone as it vibrated once in his pocket. A message from Grace Caldwell appeared on the screen, "Arriving now. Is the room ready?" Marcus typed back with one thumb, "The room is ready. The truth is waiting outside." Grace Caldwell arrived at the end of the hallway with a leather briefcase in one hand and the calm urgency of someone who had spent years walking into rooms where people hoped oversight would stay delayed. She was not in uniform. She did not need to be. Her authority came from the city charter, the civilian review ordinance, and a reputation for reading every footnote before asking the one question nobody wanted answered. She saw Marcus before she reached the door, standing beside the wall. Instead of seated at the head of the table where he belonged, her steps slowed. Her eyes moved from Marcus to the conference room, then to the black dome camera above him. "Captain Ellison," she said quietly, "why are you outside?" Marcus did not embellish. He did not add heat to the moment. He simply said, "Officer Whitaker denied entry and stated he was maintaining order." Grace's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "Did he review your credentials?" He looked at them. That answer told her enough. Before she could respond, the elevator opened behind them with a soft chime, and Deputy Chief Laura Bennett stepped out carrying a slim binder against her chest. She was a tall woman in her late 50s with silver blonde hair pulled neatly back and the kind of posture that made younger officers straighten without being told. Bennett had spent 31 years in the department, long enough to know the difference between confusion and disrespect, long enough to know that people often called it a misunderstanding only after the camera saw them clearly. She looked from Grace to Marcus. "Why has the hearing not started?" Grace turned slightly. "Because the chair has been left in the hallway." For 1 second, the only sound was the fluorescent hum above them. Bennett's face tightened, not with surprise, but with disappointment, so heavy it felt older than the morning. She looked at Marcus. "Captain, I apologize." Marcus gave a small nod. "The hearing is still recoverable." Bennett studied him for a beat, and there it was again, the quiet discipline that had made the city choose him in the first place. Not ego, not revenge, control of self. Inside the room, Whitaker was still speaking, his voice muffled by the door, but clear enough in rhythm to reveal confidence. He had no idea the hallway had changed. He had no idea the decision he made in 30 careless seconds was about to sit beside every other fact in the file. Grace reached for the door handle, then paused. "Before we walk in," she said, "I want the record to reflect that this delay began before the hearing was called to order." Bennett nodded. "It will." Marcus looked through the glass. Alicia Monroe had turned toward the door again, as if she sensed the room's balance shifting before anyone else did. Ryan Cole sat frozen with his cup in both hands. The empty chair waited at the end of the table, and the nameplate still lay face down like a secret the room had been too arrogant to lift. Grace opened the door. Conversation died halfway through Whitaker's sentence. Every head turned. Grace entered first, followed by Deputy Chief Bennett. Marcus remained at the threshold for one breath longer, not because he hesitated, but because he understood the power of a moment arriving cleanly. Bennett walked to the head of the table and placed her binder down beside the empty chair. Grace picked up the white nameplate, turned it over, and set it upright for everyone to see. Captain Marcus Ellison. Hearing chair. The room became so quiet that the click of the nameplate touching the table sounded like a gavel. Marcus Ellison stepped into the room, and nobody spoke. The silence was not respectful yet. It was stunned, exposed, uneven, the kind of silence that comes when people realize the story they were telling themselves has just been taken away. Officer Whitaker stood halfway out of his chair, one hand still resting on the table, his mouth slightly open as if the right explanation was somewhere nearby, but refusing to come closer. Marcus did not look at him first. That mattered. He walked to the head of the table with the same measured pace he had used in the hallway, placed his gray folder beside the nameplate, and buttoned his jacket before sitting down. Deputy Chief Bennett took the seat to his right. Grace Caldwell sat to his left and opened her briefcase with a soft click. Across the table, Sergeant Alicia Monroe watched Marcus with an expression that looked almost like relief, but not quite. Relief was too simple for what she felt. It was the feeling of seeing someone enter a room without asking permission to be human inside it. Marcus rested both hands on the folder. "This hearing will come to order," he said. His voice was calm, but the room obeyed it instantly. Chairs settled. Papers stopped moving. Even the air seemed to hold still. Marcus looked around the table slowly, making eye contact with every person present before finally turning to Whitaker. He did not glare. He did not smile. "Before we review the incident involving Jordan Price," Marcus said, "we will address an event that occurred outside this room at approximately 8:56 this morning." Whitaker swallowed. "Captain, I believe there was a misunderstanding." Marcus let the word sit there. Misunderstanding. So often it arrived after disrespect, carrying a towel, trying to wipe fingerprints off the glass. "Officer Whitaker," Marcus said, "you reviewed my identification." "I looked at it, sir." The sir came late, and everyone heard it arrive. "You saw my rank." Whitaker glanced toward Bennett, then back at Marcus. "I saw it, but I was not aware of your role in the hearing." Grace Caldwell lifted a document from her file. "The final agenda was distributed by email yesterday at 4:17 p.m. Your department account opened it at 4:32 p.m. Whitaker's face tightened. No one moved. Somewhere near the back of the room, Ryan Cole lowered his eyes. Marcus continued, "When I asked whether you were denying me entry, you said you were maintaining order. Tell this board what disorder you observed." Whitaker looked down at his hands. They were folded now, controlled, trying to look official. "I was concerned about unauthorized personnel entering a restricted proceeding." "What behavior suggested I was unauthorized?" Whitaker breathed in. The answer should have been easy if the decision had been fair. Badge, rank, agenda, identification. All of it had been there. The room waited. Whitaker said nothing. Marcus nodded once, not as victory, but as record. Let the minutes reflect no specific behavior was identified. Alicia Monroe's pen began moving again. Ryan Cole looked up. And in that moment, the hearing became more than a review of one night on the east side of Brookhaven. It became a mirror, and every person in the room had to decide whether they were brave enough to keep looking. Marcus opened the gray folder, but he did not begin with anger. He began with time. At 10:42 p.m., Officer Whitaker initiated the stop, he said, sliding the incident timeline into the center of the table. At 10:43 p.m., Jordan Price provided his license and registration. At 10:44 p.m., he asked why he had been stopped. At 10:45 p.m., backup was requested. Each sentence was plain. Each minute landed like a stone placed carefully on a scale. Grace Caldwell connected a laptop to the wall screen, and the first image appeared, not dramatic, not sensational, just the frozen frame of a quiet street under yellow lights. A blue sedan pulled near the curb, 2 patrol units behind it. Marcus did not allow the room to rush ahead. "We will review the facts in order," he said. "No assumptions. No shortcuts." Whitaker sat stiffly, staring at the screen as if he could force the footage to remember something different. Marcus played the first segment. Jordan's voice came through the speaker, polite and confused. He asked whether he could reach for his insurance card. The officer on the recording told him to wait. Jordan waited. Marcus paused the video. The subject complied with that instruction. "Correct." Whitaker's jaw moved once. "Yes." Marcus nodded. Let the minutes reflect compliance. The video continued. A second instruction. Another pause. Another confirmation. Compliance. 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 The word began to change the room. It was no longer a description. It was a witness. Alicia Monroe's pen moved steadily across her legal pad, and with every note she wrote, her shoulders seemed to loosen, as if truth had finally been given permission to breathe. Then Marcus placed Whitaker's written report beside the transcript. Your report states that the situation escalated after repeated refusal to follow lawful commands, Marcus said. Point us to the timestamp where the first refusal occurs. Whitaker looked at the paper, then at the screen, then back at the paper. It happened fast. Marcus's voice stayed even. Fast is not a timestamp. The room went still. Ryan Cole shut his eyes for half a second, and when he opened them, something in him had changed. Marcus turned to him. Officer Cole, your supplemental statement originally matched the body camera transcript. The version submitted later did not. What? Ryan's face reddened. He looked at Whitaker, then at Bennett, then at the table. Fear was there. So was shame. I was told the first version created problems, Ryan said quietly. Whitaker turned sharply. That is not what happened. Marcus raised one hand, not harshly, only enough to restore order. Officer Cole is answering the question. Ryan swallowed. I should have spoken sooner. I knew the wording was wrong. Alicia Monroe set down her pen. I was told the same thing, she said. Her voice was steady, but the room felt the courage it cost her. I was told that if the report did not support the stop, the department would look weak. Marcus looked from Alicia to Ryan, then to Whitaker. The department does not become weak when the truth is recorded, he said. It becomes weak when truth has to ask permission. No one answered. There was nothing left for denial to stand on. The screen glowed behind them. The folder lay open. The minutes kept moving, and the hearing did what every honest hearing is supposed to do. It made power explain itself. By the time the hearing ended, the room no longer felt like the same place Marcus Ellison had been kept from entering. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The city seals still hung on the wall, and the same framed words still promised integrity, service, restraint, and trust. But now those words had weight. They were no longer decorations. They were demands. Deputy Chief Bennett announced that Officer Whitaker would be placed on administrative leave pending an independent review, and that all related reports would be audited by the Civilian Oversight Office. Grace Caldwell added that the hallway incident would be included in the official record, not as a side note, not as a misunderstanding, but as part of the same pattern the hearing had been called to examine. Whitaker did not argue. For the first time that morning, his confidence had nowhere to stand. He gathered his papers slowly, avoiding the eyes of the people around him, but Marcus did not watch him with satisfaction. Satisfaction would have been too easy, too personal. Marcus had seen enough broken trust to know that one officer facing consequences did not heal a community overnight. It only opened a door that should never have been locked. When the room cleared, Ryan Cole remained behind near the wall, still holding the paper cup that had gone cold an hour earlier. Captain, he said, his voice unsteady. I should have said something in the hallway. Marcus closed the folder and looked at him. Yes, he said. Not cruelly. Not softly enough to erase it. Just honestly. Ryan nodded, accepting the weight of the answer. I was afraid of what it would cost me. Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket. Fear is real, he said. But so is the cost of letting someone else pay for your silence. Ryan looked down, and Marcus let the words stay there because some lessons needed quiet to become permanent. Outside the building, Denise Price stood near the front steps with her hands folded around the strap of her purse. She had not been inside the hearing, but she had waited anyway, the way mothers wait when the world has handled their children too roughly and offered them paperwork instead of peace. Marcus walked down the steps to meet her. Mr. Price's case will move forward for full review, he said. The record will include the footage, the corrected statements, and every discrepancy identified today. Denise listened without blinking. Then she asked the question that mattered more than procedure. Will they see him as a person? Marcus's voice softened. They will if I have anything to say about it. For the first time, her shoulders lowered. Not because everything was fixed, because someone had finally answered like her son was human. Later that afternoon, Marcus passed conference room 4B again. The sign had been removed from the door. The hallway was empty. The camera still watched from the ceiling. He stopped for a moment, remembering Whitaker standing there, guarding a room he did not understand from a man he refused to recognize. Then Marcus kept walking, his steps steady against the polished floor. That morning, a man tried to protect Power by blocking a doorway. But Power was never the doorway. Power was the responsibility waiting on the other side, and Justice had known who belonged in the chair all along.